Hi there, and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington, where it's Groundhog Day in the halls of Congress, with Washington in the midst of another government shutdown. Less than 3 months since the last funding fight, this time over Democrats' demands for reforms to ICE and Border Patrol in the aftermath of the fatal shootings of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy in Minneapolis. Right now, the House Rules Committee is meeting as it tries to set up a floor vote on the government funding package that was passed by the Senate on Friday. That deal, negotiated between Senate Minority Leader Schumer and the White House, includes only 2 weeks of funding extensions for the Department of Homeland Security to give lawmakers time to negotiate potential reforms. But a number of House Democrats have panned the Senate deal, raising the possibility of another prolonged shutdown. Yesterday on Meet the Press, House Speaker Mike Johnson told Kristen Welker he's confident the House will pass that legislation to reopen the government by tomorrow, but he appeared less open to some of the reforms put forward by Senate Democrats.
Are you confident that the government will reopen on Monday with Republican votes? Do you have enough Republican support?
Well, let's say I'm confident that we'll do it at least by Tuesday. Some of these conditions and requests that they've made are obviously reasonable and should happen, but others are going to require a lot more negotiation.
And you'll support some of those that you say are reasonable?
Yes. In fact, I was in the Oval Office with the president a few days ago when he was on the phone with Leader Schumer, and they agreed, and Tom Homan was on the other line, and they agreed to most of those conditions. But the mask, for example, the additional judicial requirement for a warrant would be a whole other layer of effectively bureaucracy.
Complicating matters, Speaker Johnson is working with a razor-thin majority and can only afford one Republican defection once Democrat Christian Menifee, who won the special election in Texas, gets sworn in. And moments ago, President Trump posting on social media urging the House to pass his funding deal without delay, saying we cannot have another long, pointless, and destructive shutdown. Meanwhile, in Minnesota over the weekend, a federal judge rejected a bid by state and local officials to temporarily halt Operation Metro Surge, the Trump administration's deployment of federal agents, but did acknowledge the, quote, profound and even heartbreaking consequences of that deployment to the community. One of those heartbreaking consequences was the detention of 5-year-old Liam Cojeno Ramos, who was taken into custody with his father and transferred to an immigration facility in Texas last month. The photo of him being detained by ICE agents in his blue hat and Spider-Man backpack drawing nationwide backlash. But today, he and his father are back home in Minnesota while their immigration case proceeds through the court system. Texas Congressman Joaquin Castro posting this video on social media of Liam and his dad walking out of the Dilley Detention Center last night. Joining me now is our team of reporters. NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapur is on Capitol Hill. Also with me is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, and NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa is on the ground in Minneapolis. Let's start with you, Sahil. Where do things stand when it comes to this government funding package? How likely is it that it's going to be passed tomorrow, like Speaker Johnson is predicting?
Well, Ryan, the House does appear to be in good shape to pass this bill tomorrow. And part of the reason is it got a big boost in the last hour when President Trump posted on Truth Social saying that every member of the House should support it. That's important because every Republican in the House not named Tom Massey has proven malleable to his wishes. So the fact that he's out there saying it should pass with no changes, that is also important because there's some Republicans who wanted to make changes to this, add some of their demands onto it, which would have created problems in the Senate when it would have to go back. Trump is saying that is not going to happen. Put a pin in all of those demands, just pass it as is, and reopen the government, which is in a shutdown right now since Saturday. What's interesting here is this division between the Democrats, including the top Senate Democrat, Chuck Schumer, who negotiated this deal and voted for it, and Hakeem Jeffries, the top House Democrat, who did not appear to have a hand in cutting this deal and has indicated to Speaker Johnson, as he told Kristen Welker, that Democratic leaders are not going to support this. Take a look at this letter led by Benny Thompson, the top Democrat on the committee that oversees DHS, urging colleagues to vote no. He says, quote, Democrats must act now to demand real changes that protect our communities before ICE and CBP receive another dollar in funding, end quote. He says that's what constituents want them to do. In other words, they don't even want a 2-week stopgap bill to keep negotiating. Benny Thompson and many Democrats appear to think that DHS funding should not go on in any form at all until they get these reforms.
Well, Sahil, I mean, it does seem as though they're positioned well to get this passed, but it seems as though the real fight is going to be after the government reopens and they need to negotiate these proposed reforms to ICE and CBP. They've only got a 2-week window to get this done. How difficult will it be to get consensus on those reforms?
Enormously difficult, Ryan. I think this is going to be the much bigger challenge. Yes, passing a bill to reopen the government and do a 2-week stopgap for DHS looks to be in good shape. But the bigger struggle here is going to be coming up with a deal that President Trump and both parties in Congress, at least majorities of the House and Senate, can live with when it comes to Democratic demands to rein in ICE and CBP. I just spoke moments ago to Senate Majority Leader John Thune, who identified multiple issues that he thinks would be problematic, controversial on the Republican side, including the Democratic demand to prohibit agents from wearing masks. He said that was going to be a problem. Requiring judicial warrants. He said that was also going to be controversial among Republicans. He indicated that Republicans are going to have some of their own demands, like ending sanctuary cities, which Democrats are not going to want to tolerate. So it's a big, big open question whether they can come to a sweet spot here. And for Democrats, look, they see this as an existential question of reining in what they believe is now a lawless agency, with ICE and CBP that are operating outside the bounds of the Constitution. And they don't want to put their fingerprints, many of them at least, on anything that keeps funding going for these agencies, Ryan.
Okay, Sahil, we'll have to wait and see if Congresses, as they often do, and if this gets done, and then what the fight looks like after. We appreciate that report. Monica, let's go to you now. This funding package was negotiated between President Trump and Minority Leader Schumer. We heard Speaker Johnson earlier in his interview with Kristen saying that he was in the room when they were talking on the phone about this. Should we expect the president to get on the phone to make sure House Republicans pass this funding package? It was probably enormously helpful to Speaker Johnson that he posted this Truth Social post, but could he do more to make sure it gets over the finish line?
Ryan, you know this so well. If we look back to the last shutdown, the tone this time around from the president is a different one. Remember that back then he was a bit on the sidelines, certainly at the beginning of it. That is not the case with this shutdown, with the president posting in that social media message that he will work together in good faith between Republicans and Democrats to try to see if they can get to this solution, to get to this place, to get the government reopened as quickly as possible. He is saying essentially we cannot have another long, pointless, and destructive shutdown that will hurt our country so badly, one that will not benefit Republicans or Democrats. So I do think you can expect the president to lean in on this, to be involved. It was notable also that Speaker Johnson said in that interview with Kristen that Tom Homan was on the other line while they were all gathering and trying to figure out a way forward here. I think given the fact that the president was willing to make that change to send Tom Homan to oversee the operations on the ground now, they have had a little bit of different messaging on exactly what's happening in Minneapolis in the days since he made that decision about a week ago. But I do think the president is going to try to use every lever he can to see this come to an end fairly quickly.
And you're right to point out, Monica, that it seems the president is aware of how the optics of the tactics in Minneapolis could be problematic for him. We know that Homan's there. We know that they've made at least some changes on the ground. But is he ready to make real concessions on efforts to rein ICE in?
Yeah, and that is the big question. Remember that Tom Homan in his big news conference last week said that there could be improvements made, that there was no way you could call what was happening in Minneapolis perfect or flawless, that there were changes that they were going to see. And then he used the word drawdown. And then when the president was asked what that meant and whether there really was going to be this scaling back in Minnesota, he said, no, absolutely not. And then a White House official told us that basically the president is still trying to carry out his larger immigration policy and priorities here, but that Tom Homan on the ground is somebody who can make some adjustments. So we simply don't know yet, Ryan, whether those changes are going to be enough to change what has been happening there, but certainly they have more of an eye toward potentially making those changes while not wanting to signal that it's a complete reduction in force there or a complete withdrawal from the city of Minneapolis or from the state of Minnesota. But I think something else that happened last week is an indication when you talk about Maine and some of the targeted enforcement raids there that were being conducted that had been canceled and scaled back, with Senator Susan Collins, a Republican, of course, announcing that, saying that she worked that out directly with the DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. So you are seeing signs in this administration of a change and a shift. Again, is it going to be a massive change in the tactics? It's too early to say.
Okay, Monica, thank you for that. Let's turn now to Julia here in the studio. We mentioned at the top of the show a judge did not grant the state's effort to end Operation Metro Surge. Tell me more about what she said in her ruling.
Well, they were asking for a preliminary injunction. So that means someone intervening because there's so much damage being done that before they can even weigh in on the merits, they need to put a stop for this. And she seemed genuinely pretty conflicted, but backed up her ruling, pointing to the circuit court, because she said, this is Catherine Menendez, a judge who was appointed by Joe Biden, who said, yes, there's damage being done here to the state, but the Eighth Circuit has already tied my hands because they say that if I stop the federal government from doing the business of the federal government, which is their right to enforce immigration law, federal law, that would be causing harm to the federal government. She's basically saying, I don't want to open the window for judges to continue to put a stop on the federal government's authority when there's no real reason to do so, because that could cause further harm down the road.
Okay, so let's talk more about that church protest, where there's been a lot of fallout from. Obviously, the journalist Don Lemon was arrested as a result of it. Attorney General Pam Bondi announcing that there have been 2 more arrests tied to this. What more do we know about that?
Yeah, that's right. These are 2 people who were named in the indictment that we saw when we got the news about Don Lemon. And she's saying, if you riot in a place of worship, we will find you. This is, of course, what she put out just recently after these arrests. And she's naming these 2 people here. We understand that Ian Davis Austin is a veteran, and Jerome D'Angelo Richardson has described himself as someone who's gone to college in Minnesota. We believe is still a student. Not nearly as much known on them. And of course, they're not as high profile as Don Lemon, but these appear to have been protesters, people who have been involved in the effort really to resist what they see as an executive overreach by CBP and ICE. And they were in the church that day. Remember, they targeted the church because the pastor there is an ICE official in that region. So that's why they were there. Don Lemon, of course, says he was just acting as a journalist.
Right. And then, as if there wasn't enough going on, DHS also confirming there are 2 measles infections at the Dilley Correction Center. What do we know about this? And could it be the sign of more to come?
Well, and of course, Dilley got back in the headlines again because that's where Liam was held, the report that you heard from Maggie there. And so this is obviously raising questions about what's happening in Dilley. We have seen outbreaks in ICE detention centers in the past. There were problems during COVID. What's different now is that these are people who've been taken from the interior of the country and put there rather than people crossing the border who go through those medical screenings when they cross. Measles is up across the country. This is not unique. But what we heard from DHS is that they've put a real stop on any movement within Dilley. So that not only means that life just got a lot worse for the families that are being held there, but it also means that they think that they really need to contain this so that it doesn't become more widespread. Dilley is the largest family residential center. It was closed under Joe Biden. It was reopened under this Trump administration. And now it's getting a lot more attention because this isn't the first administration to deport children. But when you see so many of them that have been taken from their schools, from their families, from their communities and held there, it puts it in a different light, especially now with measles.
Yeah, right. You mentioned Maggie. Let's go to her now in Minneapolis. She's on the ground where Leon Ramos has just come back home. Maggie, what's next for him and his family's immigration case? What kind of situation is he returning to?
Well, Ryan, as far as the situation that he's returning to, I'll tell you, I'm standing in front of Liam's elementary school today. And the reason that we're here is because this school is closed due to a bomb threat that was emailed into actually multiple schools in the Columbia Heights School District overnight, which caused the entire district to shut down. Effectively, what this means is that this kid is home, his dad is home, and everyone that we've spoken to, including the superintendent last night, is unbelievably relieved. It's like this rare sigh of relief here. But he's coming home to chaos, and he's coming home to this continually tense situation here in the city that he's the only city he's ever known as his home. And specific, by the way, to the measles outbreak that you and Julia just spoke about, we've reached out to the family attorney to ask how Liam is doing, because remember last week, Congressman Joaquin Castro, the one who escorted him out of Dilley over the weekend, last week when he visited Liam and his dad, he said Liam wasn't doing very well. He said, in his words, he seemed depressed, that he wasn't eating well, and he seemed to kind of indicate that he might be falling under the weather. So in the wake of the news of this measles outbreak over the weekend, we reached out to the attorney to ask how he's doing health-wise. We haven't heard back, but obviously Liam's condition is top of mind for a lot of people. As far as their case goes, they're waiting for that case to move forward. And again, the family attorney said that they had come legally, they had applied for asylum. I reached out to DHS over the weekend to say, with this ongoing operation continuing, as we saw from the judge's ruling here in Minneapolis, can Liam's family expect to basically not be targeted for arrest moving forward while their case continues? DHS declined to answer that question directly. I even reiterated the question after they gave a generic statement about how the agency doesn't specifically, they say, target children, which people here on the ground dispute that based on what they've seen. And they, again, refuse to say that the family is basically safe from arrest moving forward. So right now, they're asking for privacy. The superintendent said there are no plans for Liam to come back to school at this point. They're just kind of together, healing, hoping this moves forward. Again, just with all this chaos, Ryan, swirling around them.
Yeah. All right. Maggie, Vespa, thank you for your excellent work on the ground there. We appreciate it.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.